Good morning to everyone. Hope you're having a good day. Karen and I were away this past weekend and had a couple funny experiences at the hotel where we were staying, and they had to do with the elevator and other people using the elevator. The first one was, I think it was the first day we were there. Um, we got on the elevator, and the elevator was about to close, and there was a young lady obviously hurrying to try to get to the elevator. And so as it almost closed, I held out my hand and I had the door open up again. We held the door open while she got on, and then we rode down to the first floor, and she never said a thing. And I remember thinking, well, that's odd. Probably the response was on my mind because of the topic that we're going to get to in today's podcast. I don't know. But then later in the day, we were riding the elevator down. When we got to the ground floor, there was a man with a dog on a leash and um, having a little bit of trouble with the dog and wasn't immediately making it to the elevator and held the door open again, this time as we got off, held the door open while he got his dog onto the elevator. And he was very thankful. And I just got thinking about those two responses, how little effort it takes to be thankful towards other people. It takes very little effort. Now, I don't know what's going on in the young lady's mind and heart. She seemed a little bit shy and all. And, I'm not all that shy, so I don't relate to that kind of shyness. Was she shy? Was she whatever? But just basic human politeness. You should be able to say thank you to people when they do things for you. Um, it just you don't do them for the thanks from other people, but it certainly helps to be thankful. So today's podcast is on thankfulness, which is interesting. The Monday after a Thanksgiving long weekend, here we are talking about thankfulness. Found in Colossians 3:15, and be thankful. This is a funny phrase in here. If you look at the passage here, Paul, I believe, is dealing, I bolded and underlined this saying right here that he wrote, if any of you has a grievance against someone. I don't know what was going on for the Apostle Paul and the Colossian church that he's writing to. I don't think like he could have just been giving general life instructions as I'm attempting to do with you here today. I don't have anybody specific in mind in my podcast world that I think needs to hear about thankfulness and that I'm writing to you that you ought to be more thankful. And I don't have any of that in mind. Maybe Paul didn't have anybody in mind, but I'm pretty sure he did because most of the time when he wrote, he crafted his letters around issues that were going on in the church. And because he went on so much about this, something was going on among the believers in the church in Colossae. I don't know what it was. He doesn't say what it is. It's not important for us to know in this case what it is. Sometimes when he wrote letters about bad behavior, he named the specific bad behavior, like in First Corinthians. I've heard that one of your members is sleeping with his father's wife, his stepmother, and you guys really ought to take care of that. Sometimes Paul was very specific. A lot of times he wasn't. He simply recognized there was an issue, and then he talked about it. So in this case, some buddies are not getting along. We don't know what it is, but he writes some various things to help them with that. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, and then show forbearance towards one another. Bear with each other. And we talked about what does that mean? And then forgive one another if anyone has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. It's like it's building. It went from five general good characteristics to two that are a lot harder to do, forbearance and forgiveness. And then he says, and over all these virtues, put on the virtue of love because it's going to bind all this together. Boy, now he's really set the standard quite high. And he says, love binds them all together in perfect unity. And he finishes with, and let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. This is not so much talking about personal peace in the midst of personal storms. Yes, Christ can and will and give us peace in the midst of our own personal crises. Paul is writing this, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to people that aren't getting along. This is what we looked at on Friday. One of the things in as I reviewed it in my mind, I realized I didn't point out that I meant to, is this is not peace that we need to ask Jesus for. We already have this peace. Jesus made a new man out of two. Um, I think it's Paul, Apostle Paul talks about that he has brought together Gentile and Jew and made one new man out of them. Um, he is our peace. We already have this peace. So we're not supposed to pray for the peace of Christ, like, Lord, please give it to us. We already have it. What Paul is saying is you need to put it to work in the daily grind of life. When you have grievances against one another, you need to put the peace of Christ over that. Oh, and by the way, be thankful. It's not how he meant it. It's almost how it sounds. Oh, by the way, be thankful too. No, thankfulness is actually at the core of what's going on. Um, it, I don't know. I got thinking. I want to share with you some verses out of Romans. For those of you who have been in Romans many times, this will be very familiar. Paul's talking about the problem that people have, that the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So, not only should we and know these things about God, his eternal power and his divine nature, but we ought to respond in a proper way. But people did not. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. Make note of that. At the core of rebellion against God is the fact that we do not glorify God as we ought to, nor do we give thanks to him. And the result is their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Futility, foolishness, and darkness marked the lives of people. I find it interesting that at the core of rebellion is the issue of worship, of saying to God, this is how great you are, and then saying to God, I am thankful today for who you are. Yes, Paul no doubt has in mind general thankfulness. Somebody holds the elevator door for you, you ought to say thank you to them. Somebody serves you a meal, you ought to say thank you to them for that. Somebody does something else for you, you ought to say thank you to them for that. It's a good life pattern to have in your life. But at the core of our relationship with God, that is supposed to spill over into our relationships with other human beings, is this issue of worship, where we glorify God and we give thanks to God for who he is and what he has done. This has very practical uh, effects in our lives. So if you picture somebody that you're mad at or has done you wrong, maybe mad isn't the right word, somebody's done you wrong, and you're struggling in your feelings towards them, you put to work this principle of worshiping God through glorifying him, but also by being thankful to him. Be thankful in all things, Paul says. If you and I would then practice that with the person that we have an issue with and say to the Lord, okay, I have an issue with this person today, but I'm thankful today for who you are, but I'm also thankful today for this person, for what you are doing in their lives, for the fact that they were made in the image of God, just as I was made in the image of God. And they have value. I'm thankful for that today. If we were somehow able to do that, can you see how that would again, where we would begin to address the relational issues that Paul is talking about? So when we read in Colossians chapter 3, and be thankful, this is not a throw-in principle, an additional principle that he's just added into the mix. This is at the core of our human relationships. Thankfulness to God, and thankfulness expressed towards other people. So that's my word of encouragement for you today. I hope it helps. And Lord willing, I look forward to being with you all again on Wednesday.